The new beginning. Angela Matthews hadn't expected her retirement to begin with such unease. The morning had started normally enough, the gentle hum of the vacuum cleaner filling her new home as she prepared for the furniture delivery. At 65, she should have been settling into a peaceful routine in the modest house her successful eldest son Howard had purchased for her. Instead, she found herself caught in what would become the most harrowing experience of her life. The furniture delivery men had just finished assembling her dining room set when the first signs of trouble appeared. The screams from across the street, muffled but distinct, had sent chills down her spine. The delivery men seemed oblivious, focused on their work, but Angela knew something wasn't right. Years of raising two sons had honed her maternal instincts to a razor's edge. "Did you hear that?" she'd asked one of the workers, but he'd dismissed it as children playing. Angela knew better. There was a desperation in those screams that set her nerves on edge. Her new neighborhood in suburban Atlanta had seemed perfect on paper. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and friendly neighbors who waved as they passed by. Howard had chosen it specifically because it was only blocks away from his own home. But now, standing in her freshly furnished living room, Angela felt a creeping sense of isolation. The sound of breaking glass from across the street drew her to the window. The house directly opposite hers, a two-story colonial with peeling white paint, stood silent and seemingly empty. But Angela had lived long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. She'd learned that lesson the hard way with her younger son Jerry, whose charming smile had hidden years of substance abuse and petty theft. Just as the delivery men were packing up their tools, it happened. 3 soft knocks on her front door. When Angela opened it, she found herself face to face with a young black boy, no more than 12 years old. His eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down his face as he clutched a battered shoebox to his chest. "Please," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You have to help. They are going to kill her." Before Angela could respond, a harsh voice cut through the air. "Jaden." The boy's father emerged from the house across the street, his presence commanding and threatening. The boy, Jaden, froze, his small frame shaking. "Get back here. Now." The man's voice left no room for argument. Jaden turned and ran, but not before pressing the shoebox into Angela's hands. The boy's father watched him return, his dark eyes shifting to Angela with a look that made her blood run cold. Without a word, he followed his son inside, the door slamming behind them with finality. Angela stood in her doorway, heart pounding, the shoebox feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. She knew she should call the police, but something held her back. In her experience, involving authorities without concrete evidence could make situations worse, especially for vulnerable children. With trembling fingers, she carried the box to her newly assembled dining room table. The afternoon sun streaming through her windows did nothing to dispel the chill that had settled in her bones. For a long moment, she stared at the box, afraid of what she might find inside. Finally, gathering her courage, Angela lifted the lid. The contents made her gasp. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, lay a woman's severed finger, a wedding ring still encircling it. Beneath it was a hastily scrawled note in childish handwriting, "Mom's in the basement. Please help her." Angela's hands shook as she replaced the lid. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She thought of her own sons, Howard, the successful businessman who'd given her this home, and Jerry, whose troubles had pushed her away. Neither of them had prepared her for something like this. The sound of a car door slamming outside made her jump. Through her window, she watched as Jaden's father emerged from his house, got into a black SUV, and drove away. The house across the street stood silent once more, but now Angela knew it held dark secrets. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. If she called the police and they found nothing, what would happen to Jaden when his father returned? But if there really was a woman being held captive in that basement? The decision was made for her when she had another knock at her door. This time, when she opened it, she found Howard standing there, his expression concerned. "Mom? Are you okay? You missed our lunch date." He studied her face, noting her pallor. "What's wrong?" Angela looked at her eldest son, successful, responsible Howard, and made a decision. "Come inside," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "There's something you need to see." As she led him to the dining room where the shoebox waited, Angela realized her quiet retirement had just become something else entirely. And somewhere across the street, in a dark basement, a woman's life hung in the balance. Looking at the shoebox on her dining room table, Angela knew that the next few hours would change everything. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel decades of carefully buried secrets, secrets that would connect her family to the horror unfolding across the street in ways she could never have imagined. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her new hardwood floors as she prepared to show Howard what was in the box. In that moment, Angela Matthews made a silent promise to the unknown woman in the basement: a help was coming, one way or another. Dark revelations. Howard Matthews stared at the contents of the shoebox, his usually composed face displaying a mix of horror and disbelief. "We need to call the police," he said immediately, reaching for his phone. But Angela caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. "Wait," she said, her voice low. "That boy, Jaden, he risked everything to bring this to me. If we call the police and they find nothing, what happens to him?" Howard ran a hand through his graying hair, a gesture Angela recognized from his childhood. "Mom, this is evidence of a serious crime. We can't just dash." "I know that house," Angela interrupted, her eyes distant. "I've been watching it since I moved in. Something's not right there. The screams, the breaking glass, and now this." She gestured to the box. "We need to be smart about this." As if to punctuate her words, a muffled thud came from across the street. Both mother and son moved to the window, watching as a figure passed behind the curtains of the house opposite. "Tell me everything you've seen," Howard said, his businessman's mind already working on the problem. As Angela recounted the events of the day, including her interaction with Jaden and his father, Howard's expression grew increasingly troubled. "The man, Jaden's father, I've seen him before," Howard admitted finally. "At my office. He's Marcus Reynolds, a potential client. He's been trying to get our firm to handle his company's legal affairs." Angela felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of company?" "Security systems. High-end stuff for corporations and wealthy individuals." Howard's voice dropped. But there were irregularities in his background check. "Nothing concrete, just gaps that made our compliance department nervous." Before Angela could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number: "Please help my mom. Dad's going out tonight. Basement door code 4891. It's Jaden," Angela whispered, showing Howard the message. "How did he get my number?" Howard took the phone, studying the message. "Mom, this is getting dangerous. We should dash." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Through the peephole, Angela saw Marcus Reynolds standing on her porch, his massive frame filling the doorway. She gestured for Howard to hide the shoebox while she tried to steady her breathing. When she opened the door, Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Matthews. I apologize for my son's behavior earlier. He has an active imagination." "Oh, it was no trouble," Angela managed, aware of Howard listening from the dining room. "He seemed upset. His mother left us recently," Marcus said smoothly. "He's having trouble adjusting." Sometimes he makes up stories to get attention. His eyes scanned what he could see of the house behind her. He didn't give you anything, did he? Angela forced herself to smile. No, nothing at all. Poor boy just seemed lost. Marcus nodded, but something in his expression told Angela he didn't believe her. Well, if he bothers you again, please let me know immediately. He handed her a business card. My personal number's on there. After he left, Angela's hands were shaking so badly she could barely close the door. Howard emerged from the dining room, his face grim. We need help, he said. Professional help. The police dash, Angela began, but Howard shook his head. I have someone better in mind. Someone who can help us figure out what's really going on before we involve the authorities. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Sarah. It's Howard. Remember that favor you owe me? I need to cash it in. Tonight. 2 hours later, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, a woman arrived at Angela's house. Sarah Chen was nothing like what Angela had expected. In her early 40s, dressed in casual business attire, she looked more like a real estate agent than whatever Howard had called her, a security consultant. 20 years with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Sarah explained as she examined the contents of the shoebox. Now I consult privately. Howard helped me with a delicate legal situation last year. She looked up from the finger. This is fresh. Less than 24 hours old. Can you help us? Angela asked. Sarah's expression was serious. Marcus Reynolds has been on several agencies' radar for years. Nothing sticks ever stuck. She pulled out a tablet showing them photographs. 3 women have disappeared after being connected to him. His wives. Wives? Howard asked, shocked. He moves every few years, changes his name slightly, remarries. The women eventually leave, according to him. No bodies have ever been found. Sarah's eyes were hard. Until now, we've never had physical evidence. A text alert sounded on Angela's phone. Another message from Jaden, Dad just left. Please hurry. Sarah immediately went into action mode. This is our window. Mrs. Matthews, I need you to create a distraction if any neighbors are watching. Howard, you're with me. We are going to get that woman out. As Sarah and Howard prepared to leave, Angela grabbed her son's arm. Be careful, she whispered. That man, there's something evil in him. What happened next would haunt Angela's dreams for years to come. From her window, she watched as Sarah and Howard crossed the street under cover of darkness. Using Jaden's code, they entered through a side door. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited. Then, chaos erupted. Lights blazed in the basement windows. A woman's scream pierced the night. A gunshot rang out. And Angela Matthews realized that her peaceful retirement had just become a matter of life and death. The rescue. The gunshot shattered more than just the night silence. For Angela Matthews, it splintered any remaining illusion that her new life would be peaceful. She stood frozen at her window, watching the scene unfold across the street, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. More lights flickered on in the basement of Reynolds' house. Shadows danced across the windows, suggesting a violent struggle within. Angela's fingers dug into the windowsill as she fought the urge to run across the street. Her son was in there. Howard, her responsible firstborn, who'd always protected others, was now in unimaginable danger. A second shot rang out. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels like a physical weight pressing down on your chest until you can't breathe. Angela reached for her phone with trembling hands, ready to call 911 when movement caught her eye. The side door of Reynolds' house burst open. Sarah Chen emerged first, supporting a woman who could barely walk. The woman's dark hair hung in matted tangles around her face, her clothes dirty and torn. Behind them came Howard, half carrying, half dragging Jaden, whose face was streaked with tears. "Mom!" Howard's urgent whisper carried across the yard. "Back door. Now!" Angela rushed to her back door, throwing it open just as the group reached her porch. They hurried inside, Sarah immediately moving to secure the entrances while Howard helped the injured woman to the couch. "Call an ambulance," Sarah ordered, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "And the police. It's time." Under the harsh living room lights, Angela could finally see the rescued woman clearly. Her heart clenched. The woman's face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. Her left hand was wrapped in bloody bandages, the source of the finger in the shoebox, Angela realized with horror. "I'm Lisa," the woman managed, her voice raw. "Lisa Reynolds. Thank you for believing my son." Jaden clung to his mother, sobbing quietly. Angela moved to comfort them both, but Sarah's sharp voice stopped her. "We need to move. Now. Marcus has cameras everywhere. He'll know something's wrong the moment he checks his phone." Sarah was already ushering them toward the door. "Howard, get your car ready. We need to dash." A dark SUV pulled into Angela's driveway, its headlights cutting through the windows like searchlights. "Too late," Howard whispered. Sarah drew a handgun from beneath her jacket. "Everyone to the basement. Now. Howard, help Lisa." She turned to Angela. "Mrs. Matthews, is there another way out down there?" "The coal chute," Angela remembered. "It hasn't been used in decades, but it leads to the back alley." Heavy footsteps sounded on the front porch. Sarah positioned herself by the living room entrance, gun ready. "Go. I'll hold him off." As they hurried toward the basement door, Angela noticed Jaden had stopped moving. The boy stood transfixed, staring at the front door where his father's shadow was visible through the frosted glass. "He'll kill her," Jaden whispered. "Like he killed the others." Before anyone could stop him, Jaden rushed to the front door and threw it open. "Dad. I'm sorry. It was me. I let them in." Marcus Reynolds stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the night. In his hand was a gun, already raised. But seeing his son, he hesitated. That moment of hesitation was all Sarah needed. The former FBI agent moved with practiced precision, her first shot catching Marcus in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, returning fire as he dove for cover behind a column on the porch. The front window shattered, sending glass spraying across Angela's new furniture. "Run!" Sarah shouted, providing covering fire as Howard led Lisa toward the basement. Angela grabbed Jaden, practically carrying the struggling boy as bullets tore through the walls around them. The basement was dark and cold, illuminated only by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Howard was already working on the coal chute, trying to force open the rusted door while Lisa leaned against the wall, barely conscious. Above them, the gunfight continued. Furniture crashed, wood splintered, and someone cried out in pain. "It's stuck," Howard grunted, straining against the old door. Angela looked around frantically, her eyes landing on her late husband's old toolbox. She'd insisted on bringing it when she moved, though she'd never used it. Now, she grabbed a crowbar from inside and handed it to Howard. The metal screeched as Howard forced the door open, revealing a narrow tunnel slanting up toward the alley. Decades of disuse had left it filled with cobwebs and debris, but it was their only chance. "You first," Howard said to Lisa, helping her into the tunnel. "Then Jaden." "Mom, you go with them. I'm going back for Sarah." "No." Angela grabbed her son's arm. "You can't dash. The basement door burst open. Marcus Reynolds stood at the top of the stairs, blood streaming from his shoulder. His gun was aimed directly at them. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Especially not my wife and son." But Marcus had forgotten something crucial about basement stairs. In the dark, it's hard to see that first step. As he moved forward, the shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him. Sarah Chen, her face bloody but her hand steady, brought the butt of her gun down on the back of his head. Marcus pitched forward, tumbling down the stairs like a broken doll. He landed at the bottom with a sickening crack, his gun skittering across the concrete floor. For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus groaned, trying to push himself up with his good arm. Sarah didn't give him the chance. 2 quick shots, precise and professional, ended any threat Marcus Reynolds would ever pose again. The silence that followed was broken only by distant sirens, growing closer. "Police?" Angela asked shakily. Sarah nodded, lowering her gun. "I triggered a silent alarm when we first went in. Backup's been on the way." She looked at Lisa and Jaden. "You're safe now. Both of you." But as Angela watched the flashing lights approach through the coal chute, she knew this wasn't over. Marcus Reynolds had mentioned others. And somewhere out there, those other missing wives might still be waiting for rescue. Her quiet retirement would have to wait. There were more stories to uncover, more secrets to unravel. And Angela Matthews, at 65 years old, was just getting started. Buried secrets. The following weeks transformed Angela's new home into an impromptu investigation headquarters. Her dining room table, barely a month old, disappeared under stacks of files, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Sarah Chen had officially taken the case, using her private investigator credentials to dig deeper into Marcus Reynolds' past. What they discovered was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. 7 wives, not 3, Sarah explained one evening, spreading photographs across the table. He was more careful with the earlier ones. Different names, different states. But the pattern was always the same. Angela studied the faces of the women in the photographs. Young, beautiful, usually with children from previous relationships. Marcus Reynolds, or whatever name he'd been using, would sweep in as their savior, a successful businessman willing to take on a ready-made family. How did no one connect these cases? Howard asked, loosening his tie. He'd started coming over every evening after work, unable to step away from the investigation. Sarah's expression darkened. Someone did. 5 years ago, the detective in Oregon started putting the pieces together. James Sullivan. She pulled out another file. He disappeared before he could file his report. His body was found 3 months later in a hunting accident. "My God," Angela whispered. She thought of Lisa Reynolds, now safely hidden in a women's shelter with Jaden. Both were recovering, both physical and emotionally, but the shadows in their eyes might never fully fade. A knock at the door made them all tense. Howard moved to answer it, checking the peephole first, a new habit they'd all developed. His sharp intake of breath was the only warning before he yanked the door open. "Jerry." Angela's younger son stood on the porch, looking worse than she'd ever seen him. His usually handsome face was gaunt, his clothes wrinkled. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I saw the news about Marcus Reynolds. I need to tell you something." As Jerry stepped into the house, Angela noticed he was carrying a familiar-looking shoebox. Her blood ran cold. "I worked for him," Jerry confessed, setting the box on the table. "Not directly. Through a shell company. I didn't know what he really did, I swear. But I helped him move money, set up accounts." "You what?" Howard exploded, but Sarah held up a hand, silencing him. "Show us," she said quietly. The contents of Jerry's box told a story of organized crime on a scale none of them had imagined. Marcus Reynolds hadn't just been a serial killer, he'd been running a sophisticated operation using his security company as a front. The missing wives were only part of it. He called it the collection, Jerry explained, hands shaking as he laid out documents. Rich people paid him to make their problems disappear. Abusive husbands, unfaithful wives, business partners who knew too much. He had it down to a science. The security systems he installed. They weren't just for protection. They were for surveillance, gathering blackmail material. And you helped him. Howard's voice was ice. I needed the money. Jerry shot back. And by the time I realized what was really happening, he had evidence linking me to everything. I couldn't get out. Angela sat heavily in her chair, memories flooding back. The mysterious women Jerry used to bring home, his unexplained cash, the way he'd avoided her questions. All this time, she'd thought he was just dealing drugs or running small-time scams. There's more, Jerry said quietly. Howard, your firm wasn't chosen randomly. Marcus had plans for you too. Howard paled. What do you mean? Your client list. All those wealthy families, their security systems, their secrets. He wanted access to all of it. He was going to use me to pressure you into bringing him on as a client. Sarah was already typing on her laptop. This connects to at least a dozen unsolved disappearances across 3 states. Jerry, will need everything you know. Names, dates, locations. I'll tell you everything, Jerry promised. But you don't understand. Marcus wasn't working alone. He had partners, powerful people. And now that he's dead. As if on cue, Angela's phone buzzed. An unknown number. The text message contained only an image, a recent photograph of her standing at her front window, taken with a telephoto lens. They are watching us, Sarah said grimly. They want to know how much Jerry's told us. We need to move, Howard decided. All of us. Mom, pack a bag. Jerry, you're coming too. But Angela stood her ground. No, she said firmly. I'm tired of running. This is my home. And these monsters have hurt enough families. Sarah studied her with newfound respect. She's right. Running won't solve anything. We need to end this. But we'll need help. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Jack. Remember that favor you owe me. I'm calling it in. Bring the team. And Jack. Bring everything. As Sarah outlined their options, Angela moved to the window. Somewhere out there in the darkness, someone was watching. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see an old woman who refused to be afraid. Her quiet retirement had become a war. And Angela Matthews intended to win it. Final reckoning. Jack Chen arrived at midnight with what Sarah called his A team for former special operations personnel who now worked in private security. They transformed Angela's house into a fortress, setting up surveillance equipment and counter-surveillance measures. But it was what Jack found in his first sweep that changed everything. Your house was already wired, he told Angela, showing her a tiny camera hidden in her kitchen light fixture. These aren't Marcus's equipment. They're older. Someone's been watching you since before you moved in. Howard, Angela said slowly, turning to her eldest son. You bought this house for me. How did you find it? The color drained from Howard's face. It was recommended. By a client. Sebastian Vale. Sarah and Jack exchanged looks. Vail Industries, Sarah said. They are on our list of suspected partners in Reynolds' operation. They wanted me here, Angela realized. But why? The answer came from Jerry, who had been going through his files. Mom, remember Dad's accident? The car crash that killed him 5 years ago. Angela would never forget. George Matthews had died when his car went off a mountain road the same week he'd announced his retirement from Vail Industries' engineering department. She'd always thought the timing was suspicious, but the police investigation found nothing. He wasn't just an engineer, Jerry said, pulling out an old flash drive. He was a whistleblower. I found this in Marcus's files. Dad discovered that Vail was using Reynolds security systems to spy on their competitors, their own employees, even government officials. He was going to expose everything. So they killed him, Howard whispered. And then arranged for Mom to move here so they could watch her, make sure she didn't have any of Dad's evidence. Angela sank into her chair, decades of grief and suspicion crystallizing into cold clarity. They've been watching me for 5 years, waiting to see if I knew anything. And now they know we are onto them, Sarah added. We need to move fast. Jack, how long until dash? A window shattered in the kitchen. Something metal clinked against the floor. Gas! Jack shouted. Everyone out. They rushed for the doors, but armed figures were already entering through the front and back. Angela found herself being pushed toward the basement by Sarah while Jack and his team engaged the intruders. Gunfire erupted above them. The call shoot, Angela gasped as they descended the stairs. We can dash. They'll be expecting that, Sarah cut her off, moving to an old storage shelf. With surprising strength, she pulled it away from the wall, revealing a hidden door. Your husband's workspace. Howard told me about it earlier. The door opened to a small room filled with old electronics and papers. George Matthews had always needed a place to tinker, even in retirement. Angela had never understood his insistence on having this space in every house they lived in. Now she knew why. Dad's real workshop, Jerry said, following them in. This is where he gathered his evidence. Howard brought up the rear, helping Sarah barricade the door. Above them, the sounds of fighting continued, but more distant now, moving away from the house. Jack's team is drawing them off, Sarah explained, already examining the old computers. But we don't have much time. Working together, they pieced together George Matthews' final investigation. Vail Industries hadn't just been spying, they'd been using Reynolds and others like him to eliminate threats, manipulate markets, and blackmail their way into controlling key industries. The evidence was hidden in plain sight, scattered across seemingly broken hard drives and outdated equipment. Dad encrypted everything, Jerry realized, his tech knowledge finally being used for good. Split it across multiple devices so no one piece made sense alone. He must have known they were coming for him. A tremendous crash from above made them all jump. The fighting had moved back into the house. Send it, Sarah ordered Jerry. Every law enforcement agency, every news outlet. All of it. Jerry's fingers flew across the keyboard while Howard used his phone to record video testimony about his law firm's unwitting involvement. Angela found herself holding her breath, watching the progress bar as the files uploaded. The door to their hideout began to splinter. Almost done, Jerry said through gritted teeth. Just need 30 more seconds. The door burst open. 2 men in tactical gear entered, weapons raised. Behind them stood an elderly man in an expensive suit, Sebastian Vail himself. Mrs. Matthews, he said pleasantly. We really need to discuss your late husband's hobby of stealing corporate secrets. You murdered my George, Angela replied, her voice steady despite her fear. Because he discovered what kind of monster you really are. Vail sighed. Search the computers. Delete everything. And make sure there are no survivors this time. We can't risk dash. Done. Jerry shouted triumphantly, hitting the final key. Vale's face contorted with rage. He raised his own weapon, aiming at Jerry, but Angela was faster. 5 years of grief and anger fueled her movement as she grabbed one of George's heavy old circuit boards and swung it with all her strength. The impact caught Vale in the temple, sending him staggering. His shot went wide, giving Sarah the opening she needed. Her first bullet took down Vale, the second and third dropping his guards. Silence fell, broken only by approaching sirens. Federal agents, the voice called from upstairs. Clear. Sarah smiled. Right on time. I had a backup team waiting. Figured Vale wouldn't be able to resist coming himself once he knew we'd found George's workshop. As they emerged from the basement, Angela saw Jack and his team had successfully subdued the other attackers. FBI agents swarmed the house, securing evidence and suspects. Mom, Howard said softly, putting an arm around her shoulders. It's over. Really over. Angela looked at her sons, Howard, who'd finally learned that not everything could be solved through proper channels, and Jerry, who'd found a way to use his skills for justice. She thought of George, whose final act had been to protect others, and of Lisa and Jaden Reynolds, who would now see their abuser's entire network dismantled. No, she said, watching the sun rise over her neighborhood. It's just beginning. There are other families out there, other victims who need help. She turned to Sarah. I think I found my retirement project. Sarah grinned. I could use a partner. Someone who knows how to swing a circuit board. As FBI agents led Sebastian Vale and his men away in handcuffs, Angela Matthews stood in her doorway, surrounded by her family. Her quiet retirement had become something else entirely, a mission, a purpose, a chance to honor George's sacrifice by helping others. And for the first time since moving into this house, she felt truly at home.